part of the province. It's you as an individual Canadian. Possess these rights. That's what's important.
Stuck between the goal and the finish line. All we can do is move forward.
All we can do is continue on. The only option is us. But our hearts are ever breaking. The bleakness feels like I'll never be whole again. Time stands still for us. Time stands still for us. When loss and love are ever constant, are tied together, leave the world behind. Sweeter after the storm. We can take whatever life throws at us.
Though our hearts are ever breaking,
Time stands still for us. All we can do is move forward. All we can do is continue on. Moving on. Come hold my hand, just you and me. We'll take a stand. Moving on. Continue on. Moving on. We're moving on. The sun is out, the clouds are gone. Moving on. Continue on. Time stands still for us. Time stands still for us. When loss and love are ever constant, tied together, leave the world behind.
People who've gotten hungry for power and have discarded the individual freedoms that you and I own. They are ours. There's none two of us the same.
That is really that's our sentiment this evening. This has been a rough week in Canada. It's been a rough 3 days. I have seen every day Americans and Canadians, although most assuredly a lot of Canadians, who are so hurt, who are hurting inside. It's not even anger. It's just hurt. And I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I have no advice to give. I'm an old guy who I've been around the block a couple of times. I have lots of opinions. I have lots of thoughts. And I don't know what to say. We all hurt at the actions of a few. We all hurt when we watch violence on the streets. And what really hurts all of us is when those that we trust with our lives, or really our government, hurt us. It hurts even worse. I just want to go on record this evening as saying that I don't have a dog in this fight, really. I live on the other side of a border, but I have lots of friends, lots of family in Canada, and everyone I spoke with, again, you're going to meet a couple this evening, who are hurt. Really, really deeply hurt at the actions which we see today. So with that, I'm going to bring on our guests, William and Jessica.
I like that I get to be a guest tonight. That's nice.
Oh, I'm sorry, Will. You're not really a guest, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. So hi, everybody. Welcome to the Will and Dave show tonight. Tonight we have a very special guest with us. This is Jessica Davenport. We brought Jessica onto the show tonight as her and her hubby were in Ottawa recently. They felt the need to go to Ottawa and to see what was happening there for themselves. And we thought, who better to talk to? They just got back a day or two ago?
Thursday. Yeah.
On Thursday. And so, yeah, we brought her in. I'll pass the microphone off to her and let her talk about why they went to Ottawa, and we'll talk about some of their experiences while they were there.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Hey, anytime.
This is fun. Yeah, we just got back from Ottawa on Thursday, and it was a very difficult experience to describe. But I think that the easiest word that I've used a lot of lately is transformative. It was a transformative experience. It was one that was eye-opening. It was enlightening. It was heartbreaking. It was amazing. It was great. It was so many things. But what took us to Ottawa was last Tuesday, when there was a tentative call to action, when it became obvious that possible violence and arrests were going to be opening up. We all know there's safety in numbers, right? Even if you're doing something peacefully, there's still safety in numbers. And so we decided on Tuesday that we were going to leave on Wednesday, because our call to protect our neighbors, I think, was the strongest at that point. And then as we started talking to the people that we care about in our lives and our neighbors and our family, we realized that there were a lot of other people who felt very similar to us. And that really solidified our reason for going, because then not only were we going because we felt compelled to protect our neighbors, but because there was a whole group of people behind us, some of whom maybe couldn't because their work wouldn't allow them to show support. That's something to consider also. And so not only were we going because we felt compelled, we were going because we knew we had a community of people who felt compelled who couldn't go themselves. And that was a truly beautiful and eye-opening thing in itself. And that happened even before we got to Ottawa. So
I want to ask, because that's why you got to Ottawa. So as someone who has never really spent much time around political activism in any way, shape, or form, I just am a spectator from a distance. What's the MO? What do? You pull up in Ottawa, you get yourself a motel room or hotel room, and where do you go? Do you just go look for the tallest dude in the crowd and ask him what's up, or what's the plan there?
I mean, I can only say what we did. I'm not saying that every protest is the same, but we did a few key things on our way. We just kind of wung it. So we typed Ottawa into our GPS, and it was 4,100 kilometers to get there. So we had some time to think about what to do when we got there. So we got there. We got a hotel that was about an hour away from Parliament Hill, because on the weekends all the hotels sell out. So if you put your tinfoil hat on, we say the police bought them out. But I haven't seen confirmations of that. But what I did see was a lot of out of towners, and at every single hotel we stayed at, because every day we said, "Oh, maybe we're gonna go home tomorrow," and then we would get there, and everyone would be very passionate and dancing, and the vibe is always we have to protect the truckers. So even though it's a really joyous event, at the same time it's a very like serious and singular goal that we were all there for. Anyway, so in this adventure, we ended up staying at 4 different hotels in the area, and at every single one we had neighbors who were also at the demonstration. Every single one. That was amazing. So anyways, we drove there. We got a hotel, a different one every single night, because they would sell out. So we would get it Friday, but we couldn't extend to Saturday because it was sold out. So we go to the next one, et cetera, et cetera. And then we figured out parking, and we parked at the Science Museum. You just type in parking and then see where Parliament Hill is and think, I could walk that. And so we parked there, and then we had maps, because we also prepared with things like what to do if you get arrested. I've never protested before. This feels naughty. So what do? And we wanted to make sure that we were prepared, and we wanted to make sure that we were safe. So we got our go bags ready. We each had maps where we could see where our vehicle was parked, just in case we were to get separated. We get there, we put boots on the ground, and we just kind of started walking in the direction and hoped we were going to find it. And it was amazing, because this lady noticed us kind of looking lost and also amazed, because it's like a neighborhood of Hogwarts. It's beautiful. And she said, "Do you guys need directions?" And we said, "No, I don't think so. We're just wandering." And she said, "No, I think you do. You want to go to this street, and then you're going to turn left." And we said, "Okay, thank you so much." She says, "You're welcome. I don't agree with you guys, but I send you with love." And that was our very first experience. And that's how we got going.
That was going to be my next question. Is we'll show some clips as we go into the show here. Some clips of some stuff that you guys filmed about and during your trip there. I see lots of live footage. I see lots of footage from you guys, and I've talked to a small handful of people who live in Ottawa. But what was your experience for the most part with Ottawa residents? Obviously, you dealt with a lot of the people involved in the protest, many of which will be from out of town. But what's the vibe that you picked up from people who actually lived there, who you would have inevitably come across?
Sorry, I hit the wrong
That's
button.
okay. That's okay. The vibe in Ottawa, it was very mixed. And I'll say it had to do, I felt like, with the geographical distance from the demonstration. So we started, like I said, at a motel an hour out. And I had a conversation with the owners there. And I said, you guys Ontario just announced a state of emergency. So how's that been for you? Like, you guys okay? And their takeaway was that they had not experienced much negative impact. Their motel was full every night, and they said that they had gone to a hospital kind of near the demonstration the day before, and they hadn't noticed a slowdown in traffic. I also talked to somebody in North Bay, which is a ways away, and it was the same thing. You guys are in a state of emergency. How's your experience? You doing okay? Like, people treating you good? No problem at all. Now, the closer you got to the demonstration, and I'm going to say blocks away, we parked at the art museum, and we walked a few blocks in. And our first day, I actually have a list of 5 different experiences that we saw of residents sharing negative emotions with people. So, one was a lady on the street, and she was just walking, and somebody honked. It was a freedom honk. They got excited, and she was expressing that she had been living with it for 3 weeks. And do you know what that's like? Another one was somebody who commented just on one of our Instagram videos and said, "Get off our streets. Thank you," which was very polite, but also very clear on what they wanted. And there's 5 different things. There were letters posted on vehicles that had Canadian flags and stuff that said, "How would you like it if this was your neighborhood," et cetera, et cetera. So I will say that in general, it was fairly positive. The restaurants are busy. The people are smiling. People are nice. We're all Canadians. We tip well. I have to imagine for those who were open, it was a good experience, at least all the ones I had. Now, there were people who closed, and that's not a great experience. And there were people who were in residential neighborhoods that were experiencing honking, and those were not comfortable experiences. And those were very negative and also very valid. At the same time, it can be argued that it has to get to a certain level of uncomfortableness in order for it to be relevant. It could also be argued that it would not have gotten to that point of uncomfortableness had communication happened sooner, because we saw a steady escalation. Like, those people didn't need to live with that for 3 weeks. That didn't have to happen, but it did. I think we also saw certain things, like you saw police chiefs in other cities. Winnipeg, for example, their police chief, when addressed with in questions from the press, I think that were meant to like ignite things, things like, what police chief, what would you say to someone who just wants to get downtown just to live their life this weekend and who can't because of these illegal blockades? And he said, well, know that there's a protest in the area. And if you don't need to go downtown, maybe don't. But if you do need to go downtown, allow that it's going to take extra time to get to your destination. And I found that it was just, he was de escalating the situation just with the verbiage that he was using. And we didn't see any of that in Ottawa. We saw a steady escalation, whether it's the communication from the police department, from the police chief board, from the federal government. We just saw a steady escalation there that unfortunately impacted both the demonstrators and the residents very poorly.
Right.
So I have to ask here, if I may. So earlier on in the pre-show, you mentioned the quote by the interim in Ottawa, the interim police chief.
Mm-hmm.
Would you relay that again? As I think it's enlightening a bit.
From Stephen Bell.
Yes.
What did I say exactly? Can you remind me?
You quoted him on, oh gosh, I was hoping you to remember.
I know.
It had to do with, oh gosh, I'm drawing a blank. So go on with something else.
Him tweeting about there being some violence with the protesters, which necessitated their escalation to medium range non-lethal weaponry.
Well, that was a picture that I had that I was going to bring up another scene that was horrendous. Although I'll throw it on here. I mean, it's just easy to.
But just generally referencing violence from the protesters being the catalyst for an escalation from police forces.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at things like this, and it just amazes me. And this is his purvey. Yeah.
It's something to see, and it's something that we've seen consistently, and I don't understand why, because when you read the tweet that's on the screen, protesters were assaulting officers with weapons, warranting the deployment of mid-range impact weapons to stop the violent actions of the protesters. That is fairly inflammatory verbiage in the sense that it is, again, only going to escalate. Whether you agree with them or whether you disagree with them, you're going to escalate and ignite a whole group of people saying things like that. And my thought is that a police department's job is to do the opposite.
So I will say I've watched many hours of the protests in the last 3 days. I'm sure Susan's ready for me to turn my iPad off and not watch anymore. It's a staple in the house, and I have not seen an incident of violence on the part of the protesters. I have seen a whole lot of language, a whole lot of anger, yes, but I have not seen any acts. Now, are there some? I'm sure there are. If you have a lot of people and emotions are high, I'm sure there are some. But the hours I have watched, I have heard a lot of singing, a whole lot of hugging, a whole lot of handshaking, a whole lot of dancing, and it amazes me the attitudes of the people on the ground. The dancing and the singing is incredible. Have not seen any violence.
The fortitude of people to maintain. It's almost as though it's a troll, and I just think it's like the most Canadian troll in the whole world, because like your spirit is there, like you really feel loving and you really feel forgiveness because all these people are. But at the same time, I watched a live feed earlier, and this woman was having a conversation with the guy behind the camera about. He said, "What if you die today? What if you die and you can't go home to your kids?" And she said, "Well, first of all, I don't think I'm going to die. But second of all, like I lived a good life. I raised my kids well." And then at the end, she says, "Yep. And I would actually forgive the officer that killed me too." And he goes, "Oh, you would?" And she goes, "Yeah, I would forgive him if he killed me." And I just think like it is, people are maintaining their integrity and their kindness through some of the wildest experiences. And what you said reminded me of what I said earlier, which was that the interim police chief said in an announcement that one of the
Yes.
things that people are doing is they're using the online forum to spread misinformation and to twist the narrative. And the question to that is, we're all watching live videos. So how can we do that?
I mean, at this point, for me, in my point of view, who I haven't watched as many hours, but I try to follow up with any of the major stories that I see crop up. All of the incidents of gross misinformation that we've seen so far have been from the side of law enforcement, not necessarily from law enforcement, but from the side that propagates the idea that harsher law enforcement is necessary. When they, to use last week's example with the war memorial and the gates getting torn down, that was gross misinformation.
Mhm.
It went past being a misinterpretation into outright lying. And
This
those
is
are
a
the
great
instances that we're
opportunity
seeing
to
of
play those clips again, I
misinformation.
think.
Go
As
for
these
it. Yeah.
clips are so indicative of that. So I have them ready to go.
Look at
And
that.
I was just reading a news headline that I wanted to share with you guys really quick. So 53 minutes ago, it was posted that so-called freedom protesters took down the fencing barricade around the war memorial. And yes, they did. And I'm going to share a video of what happened moments after. What happened was a group of veterans arrived at that for a photo, and they saw the fence and that the steps had not been cleaned. And they took it down and they cleared the snow themselves. And you're going to see in my video a veteran saying that it's a fucking disgrace that it wasn't done already. So here you go. Check it out.
Very much appreciated. Hey, thank you, man. Thank you. It's a fucking disgrace.
So I added that last one because that is the scene from Global, who you were quoting in your initial tweet or your initial Instagram post. They're not ripping down the fence. I mean, it could be described a million ways, and that is not one of them. And
The person who considers that ripping, I feel bad for them, because the amount of force that they are able to use in their life is not substantial. It's interesting because not only was it misrepresented by Global News, but then days after, it was actually brought up in the House during statements by both our Prime Minister and also Mark Holland, who's one of our ministers. And Mark Holland, I actually have the quote here. He says, "The member from Yorkton Melville saying that ripping down barricades, protecting the war memorial was an act of profound patriotism. Actually, patriotism? There's failing leadership here." Is that the position of this caucus across from us? And I feel like that is such a beautiful statement. And I hope that that's the position of the caucus across from them. And I would question the Liberal caucus, is that your position also?
I feel a lot of things. When you mentioned at the beginning of this in your monologue, talking about how people who have supported the current government in any way, shape, or form feeling to a degree betrayed by their current actions. I consider that I consider myself to be in that group. I can't say that I've been overly supportive of our current government, because I haven't been. I've been very critical of them. I didn't vote for them, but I share many of what they purported to be their ideals. And it's profoundly saddening to see them throw it all out the window. When things aren't going the way they wanted them to go, whether that way is right or not, they're just digging their heels in and making it worse. And as Jess mentioned early on, why they couldn't have at least opened a line of dialogue. I think that's don't get me wrong, all of the arrests and all of the police aggression is bad in its own right, but the inability to open a dialogue is, to me, the most frustrating and painful part of this. because I feel like that's the minimum. That's the baseline for dealing with any protest or any large scale movement like this would be a line of dialogue, and they just won't do it.
You know, also, I mean, we're talking about the police violence, and yes, of course it's terrible to watch, and especially when you get the sense that there's such peaceful people on the other side. But it could also kind of be argued, and not to add to that already vast disappointment that I know that you feel, but I know. And but it can also be argued that what we're seeing right now on the ground with those police officers and with law enforcement is a direct causation of the same systemic failure of that lack of communication, because there was two routes that we could go here, right? There was a path that was law enforcement, and it can only end one way if you go with law enforcement, which is escalation and then extinguishing, right? How else can it go? They can't barter, they can't negotiate, they have no power. All they can do is essentially make those people leave in the end. And if you throw all of your resources at that, then that's what's going to happen. But they could have put maybe less money and just a little bit more, I don't know, communication towards a different route that maybe would have ended without this unfortunate confrontation we're seeing today.
So I hate to play the devil's advocate here, it really pains me to do it, but as I firmly agree with everything that we're saying here, and yet I wonder if the resolve on the part of the organizers, of the initial convoy and the protests, a lot of the wording was, we need to lose all the mandates.
Mm-hmm. But
they have to go. And again, if the wording was so hard line and the government looked at it and said, you know what, we're not going to negotiate with them, as I don't think they want to negotiate. Is that maybe a part of their mentality on the part of the government that it was a waste
partially,
of time?
But I think the government, it should be a baseline requirement that they at least, like, I look at it like an episode of Star Trek. Was the first thing that Captain Picard does in TNG is he always opens a line of dialogue. Like that is step number one before any conflict, before anything. And I mean, obviously that's an idealistic society, but you would think that no matter how aggressive these truckers were, within reason, I mean, they weren't violent out of the gate, but they were aggressive with what they wanted. I'm not expecting JT to come down himself and say howdy doody. Send an intern, for God's sakes. Do something, anything. Like, even if it is just go to the table, sit down, and they're like, we demand a removal of all mandates. Then the government could be like, well, that's stupid, I guess not, and walked away. They could at least say that they tried before they did other things. But as it is, they just started escalating. And they've just been ramping it up. They made no attempt at diplomacy.
I just have to say, I feel fulfilled as a parent, as you just made a moral reference from Star Trek Next Generation.
Man, rewatching TNG as an adult has been a religious experience that I think every teenager should have to watch that show. At least the first 8 seasons.
I have no idea.
It's amazing.
But it's a lot.
An amazing show. It's ahead of its time.
I feel I have one as a parent. So we're going to play a few more of your clips, Jess. Again, we're going to stop after each one and have a little bit of a conversation about them. Guys, these are from your Instagram feed. And there are some there's some very interesting things here.
Oh, come on through. Come on through. What is happening here? Wow, what is this lady doing? Trampling horses. Trampling. Stop it. Stop it. What? Oh my God! They just trampled this lady. They just trampled that lady. They just fully trampled that lady. They just fully trampled that lady. There's the lady. There's the lady that was trampled. Yeah, the lady got fully trampled with a horse.
What the fuck is wrong with you?
You just got crushed by a horse.
February February 18th in Ottawa, police sent horses into a crowd of protesters to disperse the crowd. What resulted was 2 people getting trampled. Afterwards, in a series of tweets, the Ottawa Police said, "We told you to leave. We gave you time to leave. We were slow and methodical, yet you were assaultive and aggressive with officers and the horses. Based on your behavior, we are responding by including helmets and batons." They also said, "We hear your concern for the people on the ground after the horses dispersed the crowd. Anyone who fell got up and walked away. We are unaware of any injuries. A bicycle was thrown at the horse further down the line and caused the horse to trip. The horse was uninjured." When I read that, the amount of times that they said a horse was assaulted in this was clearly alarming. So I went back and I combed through. I found the bicycle being thrown. Did you see it? One more time. One more time. Half speed. Now let's take a look at that horse. Our Royal Canadian Mounted Police use a very specific breed. It's called a Hanoverian. And this horse is bred to be big. We breed them to be at least 16 hands high and to weigh 1,200 to 1,300 pounds. So now, one, that protester could be violently throwing that bicycle slowly and gently towards that horse. Or perhaps a man in the crowd saw the opportunity to shift his bicycle in order to create a barrier between himself and that 1,300-pound animal. I don't know. You be the judge.
I can't help but cringe every time I watch that. I agree, TrueSwans. I hold my breath because it's hard to watch.
It was an interesting choice, especially when the message has been that we're prioritizing safety on all sides of everyone involved. It's an interesting choice to send a troop of horses to part the sea, so to speak. And it didn't go very well, I don't think.
Yeah. So the next one is of a particular interest to William, as I know this hurts him a little bit, as it's one of his, I won't say heroes, except it's a person he admires.
It's a politician that I actually, to at least a degree, as politicians go, he's a politician that I look up to.
Which one? Which one? Is it Mark?
To create chaos and mayhem.
Oh.
That has been their goal and that remains their goal.
We are therefore calling on all levels of government in Canada to end all COVID mandates and restrictions. We will continue our protest until we see a clear plan for their elimination.
It should also be clear that this convoy has always stated their goal is to replace elected officials, to attack democracy.
We have no interest in federal politics. We have one mission, and that is to end the mandates and to stop this from happening again.
I don't know what to say in defense of Jagmeet Singh.
I'm curious if you can find something.
Well, I'll tell you what I think is I think that what has happened, and I don't know that he watches hours and hours of the protest. He obviously, I think he gets his speeches or from his speechwriters who get it, their data from people who get the highlights off of a CBC, Global News, CTV, etc. And that is exactly what those networks were saying. Now,
that is the rhetoric that they're spouting.
Yes.
It's interesting that people in such important positions don't have fact checkers. It's especially because you would think that they would know how biased those headlines are. Right. And if you know how biased those headlines are and that oftentimes they're sensational, then to knowingly repeat them without fact checking, that just highlights, again, maybe a different issue here. It's really disappointing to see because it dehumanizes all the people that are now being trampled by horses. I mean, 2 so far, but everyone counts, yes. Right? And it's really, really sad to see, especially when he's talking about my perception when you're watching him in the House speak about his support of the Emergencies Act, it feels very much as though he's saying, hey, as long as this makes sense to me, as long as you're incarcerating the people that make sense to me, he said flat out, if I feel like it's being misused, we're going to pull our support. And I don't know. It's just, it feels as though he has a lot of power in this situation. And if you're not using good information / the best would be on the ground, actually seeing what's happening, are you prepared to have that much power?
The NDP and by extension Jagmeet Singh do have a lot of power, because if they decide to pull their support of the Liberal parties, if they decide to pull their support during the vote with the Emergencies Act, they could theoretically quell it, as Liberals would no longer have the numbers. Even if they got the Green Party on board, they still wouldn't have the numbers. It kind of, the NDP is going to have the major control, that swing. I'm especially disappointed because I know from previous work of Jagmeet Singh's that I've watched, I know that he has the ability to grasp and understand the nuance of wilder situations like this, and he's not. He's either willfully ignorant or not bothering to look deeper into it.
And which is worse, you know?
I like to think that he has the moral compass to not be doing it knowingly, but I don't know which I hate more, doing it out of ignorance or doing it with intent. Doing it with intent at least upholds his intelligence. Doing it out of ignorance is, I'm going to use up my swear word here. It's his fucking job to know these things.
Yeah.
That's your job, dude. Is to know this stuff. If you're going to vote on things, you should know something about them.
This is such a moment in Canadian history that I wonder how history will look at it in the rearview mirror.
I mean, I think we're seeing how history is going to look at it in the rearview mirror. We're seeing how the history books are going to look at it because we know who writes those. You know, I saw a piece done today, and it was 2.5 minutes a day with an Ottawa police officer. And let me just tell you, when I watched it, I reported it for spam because it made my heart feel good and because I felt like it was just so spammy and so not what we're actually seeing. So I think we're going to get two different versions of history. The live version that we're looking at, you know, I have them saved on my phone and news clips, and people are capturing live videos. And then we're going to have the official version. And I think that those two things are going to be very different, but we're already seeing what they're going to look like.
I want to reference the comment from Murray Whitmer there. I agree. I mean, it's law that if they do vote the Emergency Act in for a longer duration, that it's there to effectively stay. My suspicion, and I'm not a political analyst, my suspicion is that part of the reason that they're escalating and ramping things up as quickly as they are in the last 48 hours is because they know that they don't think they're going to get that extension. I don't think that the Liberal Party thinks they're going to get it, with good reason. And I think that's a large part of why they're pushing as hard as they are. Like it's out of character for Canadian government and Liberal government to move as quickly as they are in terms of escalating with force, escalating with threats of freezing bank accounts, pulling drivers' insurance. It's excessive by any country, like any first world country standards, especially Canada's. And so my suspicion is that that's the reason they're ramping it up. And I don't think that's a good reason. I think that's why it's blown up so quickly, because the last 48 to 72 hours have seen a drastic increase in aggression.
You know, it's interesting again to refer back to Steve Bell's press conference, because he said a line that pretty much the whole thing I found to be lacking in empathy. But he said a line. He said that it's going exactly to plan. And when I see that, and then I think about the fact that horses have run people over and people have been pepper sprayed who weren't supposed to be, you know, members of the press have been harmed physically. And I think that that's concerning. Is that according to plan? That is going perfectly. And also this idea, especially with the horses, this idea that there always has to be somewhere to blame. For some reason, there's no room for like, hey guys, we have a giant horse in a big crowd and accidents happen. Like there can't be accidents anymore. There always has to be someone to blame. And we're really seeing that right now. Another thing that Steve Bell said was, I've asked people to leave and I've begged them to leave. And and now I'm going to make them leave. And my question is, if someone is being peaceful, how many times do you ask a peaceful person to do something before it's justified to punch them in the head? I watched a video today of someone being punched from above by an officer. I saw a video today of someone being hit with the butt of a rifle by an officer once they had been pulled behind the lines. We had the horse situation, which looked like an accident to me, but how are these things justifiable? Because a peaceful person wouldn't move when you asked them to. Like that's the point that we're at right now. And again, it didn't have to get there.
We're burning through our time very quickly here, but the other thing I really want to draw a parallel to as we talk specifically about the violence to peaceful protesters, but also accidental violence toward members of the press and things like this. I really feel it's necessary to draw a parallel between what's happening in that regard here and what happened with the BLM protests in the States after George Floyd's death. And from progressive people, the double standard that we're applying to this situation is absolute. It's an absolute atrocity. It's deplorable, and I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to talk about it because it's always aggravating going against a group that you like to be. People like to feel like they're a part of a group. I like to feel like I'm a part of a group and a community when I align myself with people of certain political values and engage in those social spaces online and in person. And I have to look at that group right now, and I see too many of them being okay with what's happening when they weren't, when it was a protest that was in favor of something that they supported. Suddenly that violence is abhorrent. That's evil. That's awful. And suddenly when it's happening this way, it's the same violence, arguably worse because these protesters are substantially more peaceful. Not to say that all BLM protesters weren't peaceful, but the ratio of peaceful to non-peaceful is much nicer here in Ottawa. And they're staying silent. Not many people are saying they support it. That's pretty rare, but we're staying silent. And that's
It's okay to say it, Will. It's okay, Will. I promise.
It's bullshit. It's bullshit. It is grade A Alberta bullshit. Call it out. It's okay to call it out. It's okay to. Still don't agree with what they're protesting. I still think that people need to shut up and go get vaccinated. And if they won't do it, mandates are kind of a logical step. That doesn't mean I like the mandates, but I still don't agree with what they're protesting. But what's happening to the protesters is atrocious. It is vile, and it should still be called out. It doesn't matter who's doing the abusing; it's still abuse and should still be called out.
So we mentioned a while ago, Will, the line in between the reality and conspiracy theories is getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And when you see these things and you watch the actions of the police, and they're doing it at the behest of the government leaders, it's really hard to argue with the conspiracy theory and the tinfoil hat people. It gets harder and harder as it's becoming harder to rationally explain the actions of those in power. It's hard. It's
a TV show, really, is what it feels like when you're watching it. It doesn't feel like real life. And especially because it's very difficult to justify any of the actions or even the words of the Liberal Party right now under the moral compass that I operate under, of like what makes me a good person versus what makes me a garbage person. And being empathetic and being kind, those are the things that push me on the spectrum. And I feel like we're seeing so little of that. We're seeing such coldness when we're seeing different ministers chuckle over talking about freezing the bank accounts of the people relating to the convoy. Like, this is not empathy, this is not kindness. And then the question becomes, this is not liberal or conservative or NDP. These are basic core human issues. Like, we're not being nice people here. Why? Like, why are you so alarmingly unkind and unable to show empathy? Like, that's one of the most important things that we learn as kids. And it's a whole group of people. And then the question is why? What's the motivation? Because if you're not being motivated by being a good human being, like, we're seeing the addresses of the people who are disagreeing with this kind of martial law that's happening right now. And those addresses are passionate and they are fiery and they show people who care for their communities and care for people. And when you're watching the federal government deal with the situation, I don't get the sense that they love their neighbors and the people in their communities. I get the sense that they want something to go a certain way right now. And if you are not ready to comply, they will make you comply. And that's like, I can't relate to that in any way.
Yeah, regardless of how I feel about the reason or the rhyme behind the protests, if we go purely by a barometer of humanity and civility, I know which side right now is winning that race, without a doubt. I mean, you look at protesters, even if there are bad apples and bad actors in the protests, the number of people that have been handing out free meals, cleaning up the streets behind the protest, and generally just being good Canadians is vastly outweighed by the number of politicians. And I'm not throwing law enforcement under the bus, but
it's important to remember that we still are stuck with them at the end.
Oh, yeah.
Like, we have to be able to give grace and forgiveness to the same law enforcement that right now we feel are mistreating people. Because at the end of the day, if we're going to move forward united, we have to give forgiveness and move forward together. And I think that that's kind of what's beautiful about what we're seeing on those front lines right now, when we're seeing people who are actively saying, I forgive you. Whether they're faking it till they make it, they're making it. And it's something that when I watch those people, I feel so much pride. And I've never been super patriotic. I've been kind of transient and I cross the borders, and I've never been so proud to share a patch of dirt with such beautiful people before. But I'm truly proud to be Canadian, and it's because of the people and the acts that I witnessed there. Not from law enforcement, not from our government, but from the people who were there that didn't have to be and chose to be anyways.
So I want to ask you on that note, you were on the ground there. How large were the crowds? Is it actually the feeling of the people? Is this actually a majority of the people in Canada, or is it a fringe minority?
I mean, I didn't count them.
Yeah.
And when you're comparing to the whole nation of Canada, I mean, it's not huge, but for an organized, like, we're talking hundreds, maybe thousands of people. There's the main stage area where the speakers come. And at one point on Saturday, we were trying to cross the stage area, and the crowd was so thick that we were all just standing nut to butt. Like, you couldn't even move. You were just slowly kind of gliding together towards your destination. And that situation could be so scary. It could be claustrophobic. I remember I was just looking up and I could just see people's backs. Like, I couldn't even see where we were going. And then I would look beside me and there was, a seasoned lady that looked like she could be somebody's grandma who's forging away and saying, I'm going to that guy. And I don't know where she was going, but she blazed a trail and it was beautiful because we couldn't. And then, you look to the other side and there was a lady with her baby stroller. And again, there can be an argument about whether it's a good situation for kids, but also it could be an argument that not every protest is built equal. And while I have never even been to another protest, when we walked away from this protest, we described it as a festival, as a feeling of unity, as a feeling of safeness. You hug people in the street that you don't even know. You just walk down like this, high-fiving people.
I think we just lost our camera feed.
So I think we just lost William, so I'm going to give him the boot, and he's going to come back in. For those of you watching, this is an amazing It's absolutely amazing story. And it's a frightening story. It's something that I don't know what to say. I don't know how to react really, except with sadness on the part of the nation of Canada. You're not alone. I know there are a lot of us here who are looking on and saying, oh my gosh, is this really the hockey loving, beer drinking Canadians? And I'm hoping that it's not. I honestly am hoping that you all will find a way to make this happen. Peacefully.
Hi, we're here. We just have no camera feed, unfortunately.
Well, there you go. We have audio, and we'll wrap this up then, since we don't have a camera. Yeah. Any last words, guys?
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
I think that the biggest thing, I think the takeaway for us when we left this thing is that it's a scary thing to stand up. And it's a scary thing to stand up, especially with a group of people that you don't know, because especially, I mean, myself, I'm not the most social person. I'm kind of conditioned to keep my head down and move forward.
Right.
And this situation, the biggest eye opener to me was community. And that's what I wanted to bring home. And, you know, we talked about a glow that you got, and it was genuinely just because you had love from every different direction. And at the end of the day, none of those people there or myself are what other people say that we are, whether that's the federal government or whether that's the media. Anyone who believes, whether we agree on the specifics of the situation, this situation is not about masks, it's not about vaccines, it's about the fact that at the end of the day, we can have a disagreement and we can think each other are a-holes for that, and that's okay. We're going to continue, like, that's a beautiful thing. Maybe we're going to have takeaways, maybe we're not, maybe we're going to go on, and that's okay. And people right now are uniting over the fact that they want to continue to have that be okay. They're not trying to take freedom, they're just trying to maintain it.
Right.
And at the end of the day, if we all stand up, nobody can make us sit down. And I think that that's the thing to remember. If you ever feel alone or you feel isolated or you feel scared, guaranteed there's someone else who feels the same exact way. And I know from now on, I want to do better at looking at my community to see those moments where we can impact change or show love, because that's what our government needs. Some love and empathy, man.
I'm going to leave it at that. We're going to wish you all a good night, and thank you for joining us this evening as we are looking at the world evolve around us in a frighteningly scary manner. See you all. Good night.